So I came back early this morning from London. I was one day in London. I traveled to give a hesped on Rabbeinu Saratoyer Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Got back this morning. Baruch Hashem, I was a sandik of my great-grandson, born Chof Aleph Odor, Yortzeit of the Noam Melech. And the baby was given a great name, Eli Melech, Sheniske Legadlo Letoira Ulechuppe Elamasim Toivim. So I flew the entire night, and I just got back from a bris, and I gave a shiur in my koilel last day of this man, and I am a bit exhausted. I didn't close an eye this night, but Talmud Torah and Abotzes Torah comes before anything else. So the topic, the sugya of this week's shiur is in Yonah D'Yoyma. We are approaching Pesach, Shabbos Kodesh Habo Aleinu L'Toivo is the Chodesh Nisan, and after all, we are in Shnas Shvi'is. So Yayin Shel Shvi'is Bedalet Kosos. It's not a relevant question, not this year. It would be relevant next year, and to some it would be relevant even this year if we have it's based in, Yayin Shel Shvi'is Bedalet Kosos. It's a question discussed in the Yerushalmi in three different sources. Ibayalan b'Yerushalmi, Shabbos Nun Dalet, Psochim Samach Tes, Shkolim Yud Gimel. And of these three sources in Yerushalmi, there's a lengthy discussion about many halachas of Dalet Kosos, and one of the questions, Ma'il et Seis b'Yayin Shel Shvi'is, Rev Oshaya says, Yer Yoitze Dalet Kosos Yayin Shel Shvi'is. And nobody really understands what is the shaila. Why not? I mean, what is the question? And today, in the brief shiur that we will have, I will be mala al shulchan alochem. I will suggest 12 different opinions and interpretations and explanations of what is the shaila. And the very last, Achroin Chavev, is a perush nifla that we find in Reb Chaim Kanievsky al Yerushalmi. So I spoke about Reb Chaim many times since he passed away in my koilel, in other places, Shiurim, and now just Tuesday night, we had a huge hesped. There were more than 1,200 people came together in Hendon, Golders Green. And once again, I spoke about Reb Chaim's greatness and his amazing sforim. And his Perush on the Yerushalmi is really a masterpiece. And Reb Chaim demonstrated in this sefer, Soid HaTzimtzum. He had a great mind. And his Perush in Yerushalmi is Tamtzis Midoiseim Shel Gedol HaChoinim, Kav V'Noki, Shov Alachol Nefesh, a Perush Nifla. So that's going to be the last on our list. Let's start out more or less chronological order. The two most important Meforshim on the Yerushalmi, written hundreds of years ago, are two Achroinim, because we don't have Rishonim on the Yerushalmi, Pnei Moshe and Korban Eido. Pnei Moshe's interpretation, and we find the same halach in Taklin Chadetin. Taklin Chadetin is a Masechet Shkolim, Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov, one of the great disciples of the Vilna Gaon, and he says the same. The question is, Yain Sheshvi'is la'achar habiur, according to the Rambam, it's also b'hanoah. We still have a few months till Shas habiur, so we really have time before we discuss this sugya in depth. But I'm just briefly mentioning, according to the Rambam, Peres le'achar habiur, shalom nisbaru, asurim b'hanoah. That's the question. Yain Sheshvi'is la'achar habiur. Could you be yoytze dalet kosos? And what is the conclusion? Yes. And why yes? Mitzvahs lav lehenois nitnu. And this perish einoi misyashev al halev. It is so difficult to accept. Question number one, Ike Chosan Sefer. The Yerushalmi says Yain Shvi'is. The Yerushalmi doesn't specify Yain Shvi'is la'achar habiur. Imishum hu, we could be doichik. But the question is, mitzvahs lav lehenes nitnu is not relevant. The Ran and Adom Tesvav Amid Beis, and that is the opinion of most of the Rishonim. Mitzvahs lav lehenes nitnu only means that Kiyum a mitzvah is not defined as hanoah, and that's why you could be Makayim mitzvah shofar with a shofar shel oila. You could do chalitza with a sandal shel avodah zorah, and it is not defined as a noah. Because, Rashi explains, the mitzvahs are a burden on us. They're not made to enjoy, and therefore mitzvah innocently. But the Ran says, Hanos aguf di behade mitzvah, if you really derive physical pleasure and physical benefit, of course, that is a prohibition, that's an issa. And the Ran explains that you cannot go to a cold pond to be toivel in the middle of the summer because you enjoy it. You're makayim a mitzvah, tefillah bezman a mitzvah, lalis metumah v'tahara. But if you derive pleasure, that isn't a prohibition. Kal v'choymer, when we're dealing with eating and drinking, that is the ultimate pleasure. When Chazal say brochas lamadei osel odem she'ehenem yonim azeh beli brocha, that means achila v'shtiyah. Doesn't mean rechitza. And if rechitza is osel, even though it's a mitzvah, kal v'choymer achila v'shtiyah, and therefore doesn't make sense. Korban Eid, on the other hand, says the problem is lochem. And the question is, by matzah, person cannot be yotza only on his matzah, as we learn in Pesachim Lamed Ches. We learn matzah from challah, and just like b'challah, the pasuk says, "Reishis ari soisechem." You're not yotza matzah unless the matzah is yours. And the question in Yerushalmi is, called the tikkun rabbonon ken d'oraisa tikkun. Does dalet kosos have the same din as matzah? Must it be lochem? And if it needs lochem, then Perish Shvi'is are not lochem because they're hefker. This Perish also doesn't make much sense. So, Perish Shvi'is is lochem. You need to be mafker the Perish growing on your trees and your fields. But when you collect Perish, Mozen Gimel Su'udis, you collect Perish to eat. That is the posuk v'hoiser Shabbos os lechem la'achalo. V'hoiser Shabbos os lochem la'achalo. So the posuk clearly says that it is lochem. And it's not only a posuk. Mishnah, Sukkah Lametes. The Mishnah deals, a person wants to buy an eseg, but eseg has to do Shvi'is. Osa b'schoira. Mavli edma yesrig belulav. But he is Mekayim the mitzvah of Dalet Minim with Shvi'is. And Dalet Minim is the ultimate lochem. Velokachtem lochem. And in this Mishnah we see we could be Yoitze, mitzvahs esig, with an esig shel Shvi'is. And the explanation is a very simple one, as I just explained. When you collect fruit for your personal need, for you and for your family, that is lochem. There's another Mishnah, Kedusha Nun Omed Beis. Person could be Mekadesh issue with Perish Shvi'is. If it's Hefker, you cannot be Mekadesh issue with Hefker. Masim Yodam Echad Shekidush Chomish Nosham Uben Shtei Achiyos, and it was with Perish Shvi'is. And therefore Perish Shvi'is definitely is lochem. Some great Achronim, later Achronim, Reb Avrom Mendel Steinberg, Machz Avrom, Reb Nochem Weidenfeld, Chazoy Nochem, Reb Hesh Pesach Franken Har Tzvi, they offer explanation number 3. Dalet Kosos is a mitzvah. According to the Ramban, Perish Shvi'is is a mitzvah. Ein oisel mitzvahs chavilois chavilois. I dealt at length with the concept, with the sugya of ein oisel mitzvahs chavilois chavilois, and Minchas Osher, Klole HaMitzvahs Siman Gimel. And I explained, this has nothing to do with ein oisel mitzvahs chavilois chavilois. When you eat, and with that same act of eating, you're makayim 2 mitzvahs, that's not a problem. It's a Gemara mefareshes that a kohen can eat matzah shel truma and matzah shel challah. He's makayim the mitzvah of matzah, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Kohen shiur chel truma is a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Rambam writes, last halacha erchas truma is kohen shiur chel truma, says the brocha, asher kedushono b'kedushoso shel har v'tzivonu lechol truma. We don't make a brocha on Perish Shvi'is. The Chazon Ish argues, and we spoke about the Chazon Ish at great length. It's one of the first simonim in the new Sefer Minchas Osher and Shvi'is. According to the Chazon Ish, Perish Shvi'is is not a mitzvah to say. I argued, even if it's not a mitzvah to say, but there is somewhat of a mitzvah because it's Kodesh, Kedusha Shvi'is. Kedusha always must have a positive connotation and not only negative, loyla hefsid, veloyla schoira, but nevertheless. When you eat and the act of eating, you perform more than one mitzvah, it is not a problem of chavilas. Rapesh Pesach Frank offers explanation number 4, based on Tosos Shabbos Dav Chofei. The Gemara says, a kohen cannot burn Trumat Hameya on Shabbos. Ein Sorf and Kodeshim B'Yom Tov. But Tosos says Trumat Hameya is different because the Gemara says, Shalachu la'asoket tachas tavshilcho. Just like a kohen is entitled to eat Trumat Hameya, he is entitled to derive benefit from Trumat Hameya. He cannot eat it, but he could burn and cook with a fire using Trumat Hameya as fuel. So that is Eichel Nefesh. Why can't you burn Trumat Hameya in Yom Tov if you derive benefit from burning Trumat Hameya? And a kohen is entitled to do so. Tosfos says, "Dano is botel el mitzvah, and therefore ein sorf and kodeshim b'Yom Tov." So Rav Hesh Pesach Frank suggests maybe the hano of Peres Shvi'is is botel el mitzvah shel dalat kosos, and therefore would be defined as hefsid. Doesn't make sense. Hefsid, person is drinking Peres Shvi'is, drinking Yain Shvi'is, hefsid. What does that have to do with Tosfos? Tosfos deals with a totally different idea. Ein sorf and kodeshim b'Yom Tov. Even if you derive benefit, but the benefit is a tofel. After all, this is sreifes truma v'kodeshim b'Yom Tov. So the benefit of cooking is tofel to the mitzvah of sreifes truma. Would we say the benefit of eating is botel el mitzvah to eat? It's the same fundamental idea. Dalat kosos is a mitzvah shel shtia, Peres Shvi'is is a mitzvah shel achila v'shtia. What's botel to what? And how strange it would be to define this as hefsid. So we move on. The Aderes, the phenomenal Goen, the Aderes, has a Perush on Yerushalmi to Yerushalayim, and he suggests that the question is Yayin Chai, because in that same sugya, quoted 3 times in Yerushalmi, Shabbos Psochim Shkolim, the Yerushalmi says, "We yotzi dechoiva Yain Dalet Kosos bein Chai bein Mavushal bein Mozug." So Yain Chai is not Ike Derech Hashtiyah. Maybe that is Hefsid, because we explained, I'm in the middle of a series of shiurim in Kol HaLashon and Shvi'is, and one of the previous shiurim I explained that Hefsid is not only when you destroy Peres Shvi'is, you must eat Peres Shvi'is in their best form and way. And if you eat Shelo Kederech Achilos, and that is defined as Hefsid. So the question was, Yayin Chai, she'enoi orev lecheich. But according to this explanation, it's difficult to understand the psak. We are yoitze. Well, it still would be an issa l'chayra. So maybe the psak was, it is an issa, but you still yoitze dalat kosos. You violated the mitzvah of li'ochel v'lo hefsid, but that doesn't invalidate the mitzvah of shias dalat kosos. But that would be a chiddush, and why not? Maybe it would even be a mitzvah bo ba'aveira. Or sameach Rav Meir Simcha. Not in Hilchas Pesach nor in Hilchas Shemitah v'Yovel, but after in Hilchas Shabbos Choftes Halacha Yudaled. Yain shel Kiddush must be ra'ui lenesochim. Says the Or Samech, that's the Iboya Yain shel Shvi'is. And the question is not regarding Dalat Kosos, but Kiddush. Kos Rishon shel Dalat Kosos is Kos Kiddush. And what's the problem? Yain shel Shvi'is is not ra'ui lenesochim. Did I say Menachos? That was a mistake. Yain shel Kiddush must be ra'ui lenesochim. Nisach HaYayin that came together with Korban Ois Tzibur. And the Meskona, the conclusion is, you are Yoitze. And when the Gemara says Yayin shel Kiddush must be ra'ui lenesochim, it is all about the quality of wine. Must be good wine, must be tasty wine. But the reason you cannot bring Yain shel Shvi'is lenesochim is a Gezeres HaKosov, as we learn in Toras Kanim, le'ochla v'lo lenesochim, ke'en ze menoches pei daled, le'ochlo v'lo l'sereifa, You cannot burn anything that has Kedusha Shvi'is. Eimerim al gabe hamizbeach. So that's the Osamech's explanation. Would it be a doichik to say the question regards Kiddush and not Dalat Kosos? Lechoire. All the Achronim understood the question is regarding Dalat Kosos. But actually, when we check the Yerushalmi, the Loshen Yerushalmi is Mailet Seis V'Yayin Shvi'is. Doesn't say Dalat Kosos. Why did all the other Achronim assume that we're dealing with Dalat Kosos? Because the entire Sugya deals with Dalat Kosos. But maybe one could say the question regarding Kiddush, especially because Shel Kiddush is one of the Dalat Kosos. I still think it's a doichak. The Ragat Shava, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, Sofas Paneach, Kila Ayim, Siman, Perek Yud, of Sofas Paneach has a very original interpretation. And according to Sofas Paneach, once again, it's L'achar HaBiur. And it's based on a Mechlokes Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi. Perek Tes Masechet Shvi'is, Mishnah Ches. According to Rabbi Yossi, Perek Shvi'is L'achar HaBiur, Aniyam oichlim velo ashirim. Rabbi Yossi says, bein aniyim, bein ashirim. Halochik Rabbi Yossi, kemavur berambam. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's the pshat of the Tzafnas Paneach. Kora oshir biyoytze dalat koises v'yan shvi'is, kiven de chozel aniyim. So according to the Tzafnas Paneach, the shaila isn't a ge'ala ma'isa, because anyway, halochem ki Rabbi Yossi. This brings us up to 8 and 9. Lekisha atzmi. If some achronim say we're dealing with Perek Shvi'is Lachabio, maybe one could say we're dealing with Perek Shvi'is Shomo v'Nevad. And the question in Yerushalmi is the Machlokes Rashi Rabbeinu Tam. There's an Isser Lishmor Perek Shvi'is because it's Hefker. There's an Isser to work the fields or the trees because that is the Isser of Avodas Oros Veilonis. But there's a Machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam b'di'eved, either Peres Osir or Mutar. Yavomis Kuf Chov Beis Omid Aleph, Rashi says, I don't know what Isser it might be. Rashi brings some say it's Osir, but Rashi says, what is the source of this Isser? Toisus, Yavomis Kuf Chov Beis Omid Aleph, once again in Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes, twice again in Sukkah Daf Lamed Tes. And then the fourth time, Imenoches Peidaled. Toises quotes Rabbeinu Tam. Shoma v'Neved is also ba'achila. Maybe that is the question. No, it doesn't make sense. So why would the question be regarding Dalat Kosos? You could simply ask, is Shoma v'Neved also a mutar? Why do you have to connect it to Dalat Kosos? Or maybe one would say, L'kuli alma also. And the question regards the concept of mitzvah bo ba'avera. So why wouldn't we ask regarding matzah, regarding moral, regarding kiddush? Why must it be dafka dalat kosos? Tzorech Iyun. Number 10, and this finally brings us to the Rishonim. The only one of the Rishonim, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, is Rabbeinu Meshulam on Mesechet Shkolim. And Rabbeinu Meshulam, so typical to the Rishonim, glat, poshut, not complicated. Rabbeinu Meshulam says that the quantity of the grapes in Shvi'is is not very great because we cannot take care, we cannot cultivate them. And therefore it's poor quality. Dalat Kosos must be b'derech malochem, b'derech cherus. Could we lechatchila use yain shel Shvi'is, which is poor quality for Dalat Kosos? I think that's a glat pshat, a poshut pshat, and it has great appeal to me. Number 11 is what I would suggest. Maybe the question is it permissible to drink yain sheshvias Dalat Kosos based on the realization that most people have difficulty drinking Dalat Kosos shel yain in the same seudo? Tofa in Beis Sif Tes, we learn a Shulchan Aruch lechatchila. One needs to drink the entire kais and not only Rav Revius. And the Shulchan Aruch brings an opinion, even if you have a huge becher, a big cup that has 5 Revius, Lechatchila, you need to drink the entire cup, the entire gavia. And that's 4 kosos a night. In the Durham, we find a story in Bavli. It's also in the Yerushalmi, in Masechet Psochim. In the Bavli, it's Rabbi Yehuda. In the Yerushalmi, it's Rabbi Yoina. They drank Dalet kosos, and they suffered headaches till Shavuos. 49 days from Pesach to Shavuos, they suffered 50 days. Maybe that would be defined as hefsid. And maybe that is the question. This story that I told from Bavli and Yerushalmi is the source of a haloch and Shulchan Aruch Tafayim Beis Sif Yud. Misha einoi shoyse yayin mepnei shayayin mazikoi tzorech alit choi ka'atzmoi lishtes dalet kosos shel yayin. However, if it's yayin sheshvi'is, maybe that would be defined as hefsid. You don't like wine, you suffer from wine, yayin mazikoi. That was the question. So why are you yoytze? Maybe the response was, it's not lechatchila, but you're yoytze, as long as there isn't shtia gas. Finally, we have the schus sharing a Dvar Torah from Moron Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his wonderful parish on the Yerushalmi. And he quotes the Chazon Ish, and it's really a spark of genius. The Gemara says, Psochim nun gimel, Zman biur shel hanova is Pesach. Yes, we're dealing with Yain Shvi'is la'achar zman habiur. But not just a guess. Based on the Gemara, Psochim nun gimel, the Zman habiur for hanovim is Pesach. And the Yerushalmi says, Erev Pesach. What is the mitzvah of biur? You need to be mafker whatever you have in your home. And after you're mafker, you could take for yourself Mozan Gimel Seudois. How much wine is Gimel Seudois? Chazon Ish quotes, Reb Chaim quotes in his name, Erev and Choftes. Shtei Seudois lagabe Erev is 2 Revi'as Yayin. If Shtei Seudois is 2 Revi'as Yayin, Gimel Seudois is 3 Revi'as Yayin. But for Dalet kosos, we need 4 Revi'as. And that is more than one is entitled to take from Perish Shvi'is la'achar habiur. That's the boy in Yerushalmi. And the conclusion is, because the mitzvah is Dalet kosos, this Su'udah is an exception. Usually yain for a Su'udah is 1 kos, but not for a Su'udah's Leil Aleph de Pesach. And therefore, Odem Yoytze, B'yayin shel Shvi'is. I think it's a beautiful pshat. So I apologize, but you probably realize my voice isn't that great. I still have a cold. Short word on this weekly Parsha L'Kovet Shabbos. Parshas Tazria, the Parsha of Negoim. Chazal say in Medrash that the Negoim are a reminder to make people aware you have Averis and you gotta do tshuva. It's 100 red lights flashing in your eyes. Listen, hear, take stock, do tshuva. Negoim boim al chet shebiyodai. Different Averis. There is a discussion in the Rishonim. Is tzoras some type of an illness? Is it a natural malady, or it's something which is out of the realm of natural? The Ramban in his Perush al Torah and the Seforno following in his footsteps say, Nige begodim and nige batim are supernatural. They're not natural. But nige guf, nige yodam are natural. There always were lepers, and leprosy was a very common disease in the past. Kleokar says no. Boze velimed alze. And just like Kile Begodim and Kile Batim are not natural phenomena, neither are the Negoim that the Torah describes in Parshas Tazria and Mitzayah. So what do these 3 different forms of Negoim come to indicate and to teach us? L'cha'oira, I would think Nige batim are Avedas that somehow are associated with one's home. Mezuzah, Makkah, Yeshivat Yisrael. Nige begodim have to do with Avedas that are associated with one's garments. Tzitzis on one hand, Kil Ayim, Shatnez on the other hand, Tznius halavush, and Nige Guf are Avedas that a person does with his body. That would be one fair interpretation. Kli Yakar has a different one, and he quotes the Gemara that we find in Kedushin Daf Chof and also in Midrash Chazal, dealing with Shvi'is, Hasercha B'Pei Shvi'is, and also with Ribis. These Avedas bring poverty upon a person. Tchilo moicheres beisoi, lo yichaza b'tshuva moicher keilav begodov, lo yichaza b'tshuva moicher atzmoi le'eved. And those are the three different realms and levels of Negoim. Tchila, he will find Negoim in his bias. Doesn't take to heart, doesn't do tshuva. They will come closer to him. Garments. Nige begodim. And if he still doesn't do tshuva, nige guf. And I want to suggest interpretation number 3. Velibi oimali. Menochas mem gimel. We find this in Yerushalmi as well. Sheva biyoim halalticha. What are those Sheva? 4 tzitzis, bekanfei eksus. 2 tefillin is 6. Tefillin shigat, tefillin shosh, and the mezuzah is 7. Pa'am achas nichnas dovid lebeis hamerchetz v'omer oili shani oro min ha-mitzvahs. Because in a beis hamerchetz there is no mezuzah. You're not wearing tefillin or tzitzis. You're in a pool. Oili shani oro min ha-mitzvahs. Niska b'milosoi v'niskar rodati. And that is what the Pasuk says, Lamanasech. Ala Shminis, that's number 8. What is unique about these 7 or these 8 mitzvahs? There are Tariag, not only 7 or 8. Rebbe Tzedek Peterburger in Tshuvas Pri Yitzchak has a tshuva that he writes to the Beis HaLevi. And he says, these specific mitzvahs bring a person to awareness. Eved Hashem Unoichi. Taisis explains in Menochas Mem Gimel Amid Beis that tzitzis are like Semel Shalavdus, bringing back terrible memories of our painful history, the yellow star that the Nazis required Jews to wear. So, Semel Shalavdus, Tefillin, Mezuzah, all these have Kabbalas Or Malchus Shemayim, you have to as Hashem Elokecha. Tzitzis is not Tashmish Kedusha. Doesn't have Shemis. But Tzitzis, Uri Isa Moise is Chartem, is Kol Mitzvahs Hashem. And Chazal explain. So, the Tzitzis, Begematria, with Shemoy Nechutim, Arba Kshorim, Taryag. So what is unique about these mitzvahs, they come to remind us and bring to our awareness every moment of our lives that we're Avdei Hashem. Every time you come into your house or you leave your house, it's the mezuzah. The mitzvahs have to tefillin on you all day. Same with tzitzis. These mitzvahs bring us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They symbolize and indicate Kirvas Elokim. And kenegdom, zele umazeh osu alekim, nege batim, nege begodim, nege odom. Nege batim are keneged ha-mezuzah. Nege begodim, keneged tzitzis, and tefillin. And nege odom, nege aguf, keneged mitzvahs milush ubegofo shel odom. Lekarev ulerachek. Just like those 7 mitzvahs bring us ever closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The awareness of being in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. When you drift away, these are reminders. Nige batim, nige begodim, and nige adam. we should only come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not distance ourselves. שנזכה לעשות רצון אבינו שבשמיים בניסן נגאלו ובניסן עשיין לגאול. In these coming days of Nisan we should be זוכר to Yeshua Selamim, be as Goel Tzedek and Binyan Beis HaMikdash b'mheru v'yomeinu.